Death. It's the ultimate full stop, isn't it? No rewrites and no sequel, at least not in this life. But what happens after the Grim Reaper shows up at your door with a scythe and a toothy grin? Well, depending on where and when you've lived, the answers range from comforting to completely bonkers. Welcome back to Tenfold Gold, where we take you on a journey through the fascinating, the ridiculous, and the downright weird. Today, we're checking out 10 strange beliefs about death and the afterlife from around the world. Some of these will make you laugh, some might make you cringe, and at least one will have you questioning whether you'd rather be buried, cremated, or turned into a family heirloom. So, settle in. This is one trip to the afterlife you really don't want to miss. And while you're here, do the living a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. It's much easier than us trying to reach you through a seance. Number 1. The Tinguian mummy seats of the Philippines. Let's start in the Philippines, where the Tinguian people don't just mourn their dead, they hang out with them. When someone passes away, the body is embalmed, dressed in their finest clothes, and seated in a chair. Yes, you heard that right. The dearly departed doesn't lie down for their wake. They sit, as if they're waiting for the biscuits to be passed around. To top it off, they're sometimes given a cigarette to hold, because why not? It's like a death-defying nod to their living days. Imagine walking into a room and seeing your dearly departed Uncle Fred sitting there, all suited up, puffing away on a Marlboro Light. Well, we suppose smoking isn't going to do anything to harm them at that point. It's not just about shock value. It's meant to bridge the gap between life and death, making the transition feel less abrupt. But let's be honest, there's something wonderfully eerie about a wake that doubles as a staring contest with the deceased. Number 2. The Zoroastrian sky burial of ancient Persia. Next, we're flying over to ancient Persia for a ritual that gives letting go a whole new meaning. Zoroastrians believed that burying or burning the dead would pollute the earth or fire, both of which they held sacred. Basically, the traditional means of disposing of the deceased were ruled out for religious reasons. Their solution? Sky burials. Bodies were placed on specially built towers, known as Towers of Silence, where they were left to be, well, let's say processed by vultures. It's a practical approach, really. Nature's cleanup crew gets a free meal, and the soul is believed to ascend untainted. Sustainable? Absolutely. Peaceful? Not so much. Number 3. The Victorian post-mortem photos of England. Ah, the Victorians. A people who really knew how to lean into the drama of death, even if they were a little bit prudish about everything else. Back in 19th century England, photography was expensive, so people often saved it for special occasions, and the passing of a loved one was considered a suitable occasion. Enter the era of post-mortem photography, where families would pose their deceased loved ones for one last portrait. But this wasn't a quick snap of the dearly departed lying peacefully. Oh no. The Victorians liked to prop up the body, pose them as if they were still alive, and sometimes even paint open eyes onto the photograph to give them a more lifelike appearance. It was their way of saying, look, they're still part of the family. But honestly, looking at these photos, lifelike is not the word that comes to mind. It's equal parts touching and absolutely nightmare-inducing. We're glad that this has ceased to be a tradition by the time smartphone cameras rolled around. Number 4. The Malagasy Famadihana, turning of the bones in Madagascar. From England's stiff upper lip approach to Madagascar's decidedly more festive take on death. In Malagasy culture, the ancestors are a big deal. So big, in fact, that every few years they're dug up, rewrapped in fresh cloth, and celebrated in a ritual called Famadihana, or turning of the bones. This isn't some quiet graveside moment either. It's a full-blown party, complete with music, dancing, and a lot of laughter. Families even pass the bodies around, letting each member get a chance to dance with their dearly departed. It's all about showing love and respect, and ensuring the ancestors don't feel forgotten. Of course, if you're a germaphobe or have a weak stomach, this might not be the family reunion for you. Where's Granny's jawbone gone? Oh, the dog's got it. Number 5. The Toraja Walking Dead of Indonesia. Now, let's take a walk on the eerie side with the Toraja people of Indonesia. They have a belief that the dead can walk, or rather shuffle their way back home. When someone dies far from the village, a shaman can perform a ritual to wake the corpse just long enough for them to make the journey back to their home for burial. It's not exactly a scene out of The Walking Dead. Think less zombie, more obedient corpse. The idea is that by walking home, the deceased maintains their dignity, and the family avoids the bad luck of transporting the body themselves. Practical? Maybe. Terrifying? Absolutely. If you ever find yourself in Toraja country and you spot someone who looks a bit stiff, don't panic, just step aside and let them pass. As for the methodology used to pull this trick off, it's a closely guarded secret. Number 6, the Sin Eater ritual of the British Isles. We're heading back to Great Britain now, where a peculiar and frankly stomach-churning ritual once had its moment in the spotlight. The Sin Eater. Picture this. A person's just passed away, and their grieving family wants to make sure their soul isn't weighed down by all the dubious deeds they got up to in life. Enter the Sin Eater, a professional mourner with a very specific job: to absorb the dead person's sins by eating food placed on or near the corpse. You might have seen this acted out in a movie starring the late Heath Ledger. Usually, sin eating was achieved using bread and beer, but let's not romanticize it. It wasn't exactly a Tesco meal deal. Once the food was consumed, the sins were said to transfer to the Sin Eater, leaving the deceased squeaky clean for their trip to the afterlife. As for the poor Sin Eater, well, they weren't exactly invited to the village Christmas party. Socially shunned and burdened with everyone's misdeeds, these folks were the ultimate scapegoats. Talk about a tough gig. Number 7, the Danny finger-cutting ritual of Papua, Indonesia. From eating sins to losing digits, let's visit Papua, Indonesia, where the Dani people once practiced a particularly gruesome mourning ritual. When a loved one died, it was customary for close female relatives to cut off the tips of their fingers as a way to physically express their grief. And we're not talking about a symbolic nick here. Whole chunks were removed. The idea was that this sacrifice showed the depth of their love and pain, but it also served as a spiritual offering to help the deceased's soul move on. These days, the practice is thankfully banned, but older generations still bear the scars, literally. It's hard to imagine the phrase, "I'd give anything for you," hitting quite the same after hearing about this. It must have been especially bad if you were part of a large family. There are only so many fingertips you can give. Number 8, the South Korean burial beads. Death rituals aren't just ancient history. Some modern ones are just as fascinating. In South Korea, for example, cremation has been given a glamorous upgrade. Instead of scattering ashes or keeping them in an urn, families can have them compressed into shiny beads that look a bit like marbles or gemstones. These beads, which come in soft blues, greens, or pinks, are often displayed in glass containers, making them part memorial, part decor. It's an elegant way to keep a loved one close, but I can't help wondering how many families have accidentally lost Granddad down the back of the sofa. Still, it's a poignant mix of artistry and remembrance, one way to ensure the deceased literally becomes a family jewel. Number 9, the Sati ritual of India. Now for one of the darker entries on this list, the historical practice of sati in India. This was a funeral custom where a widow, either by choice or cultural pressure, would throw herself onto her husband's funeral pyre and burn with them. In some cases, widows were physically forced onto the pyre, which is as horrific as it sounds. The belief was that this act of ultimate devotion ensured the couple would be reunited in the afterlife, but it was also deeply rooted in oppressive societal norms. Thankfully, sati was outlawed in the 19th century, but it remains a haunting reminder of the lengths people have gone to in the name of faith and tradition. There's devotion, and then there's this act of madness. Number 10, the Yanomami ash soup of the Amazon rainforest. For our final entry, we're heading deep into the Amazon rainforest, where the Yanomami people have a tradition that's as fascinating as it is, well, hard to swallow. When a loved one dies, the Yanomami believe their spirit lingers until every part of the body has been returned to nature, including the ashes. After cremating the body, they grind the ashes into a fine powder, mix it with fermented banana soup, and serve it to the family. Yes, you heard that right. Dinner is served, and the guest of honor is the soup itself. While it might sound morbid to outsiders, the Yanomami see this as an act of love and unity. By consuming the ashes, the family ensures the spirit of the deceased lives on within them, literally. It's a poignant ritual, but if someone invited me to lunch in Yanomami territory, I'd probably check the ingredients list first. And there you have it. 10 of the weirdest, wackiest, and let's face it, most unsettling beliefs about death and the afterlife from around the world. It just goes to show that while death is universal, how we deal with it is anything but. Whether it's a glitzy set of burial beads, a dance with grandma's bones, or a posthumous bread binge, these rituals remind us of humanity's endless creativity, even in the face of the inevitable. If you enjoyed this dive into the bizarre, don't forget to give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching Tenfold Gold, and remember, life's short, but history is long. See you next time, hopefully on this side of the afterlife.